I've had this giant piece of ash sitting in the way in my shop for some time now, and while it's usually a good problem to have extra lumber in the way, I took the opportunity of this giant board as a challenge to see if I could build a coffee table out of one piece of lumber. So for this project, our goal will be a round coffee table with a thick top and slim legs since we have a limited amount of lumber. So the first step of this table build is to mill the giant individual slabs into workable pieces. I find it easiest to break these pieces down first using the track saw, followed by the table saw, and then all of these pieces will be milled up using the joiner and planer to make sure that we have both flat and smooth surfaces on both sides. To my surprise, this ash had quite a bit of curl and a ton of character across the top pieces. And after selecting the best looking faces for the top, we'll need to join each edge so we can get a good glue up. So you may be wondering why I'm first lettering each corner of the boards. And if you've ever struggled by a slight misalignment of your joiner, let me show you a trick that'll get you a perfect seam every time. By first marking one corner of all the boards and then flipping them over and marking the same exact corner of the boards, as long as we keep those corners in order and in the same spot on the joiner, it really doesn't matter if the fence is set up properly. The trick being that the joiner will cut the same exact degree of any misalignment or error, allowing us those perfect joints for a completely flat tabletop glue up. While it's more common to just do the entire glue up all at once, personally, I like to do it in two pieces, so I can run each piece through the planer, getting rid of those glue seams. It should be obvious that I won't be able to fit this entire tabletop through the planer once it's glued up, so I'll use dominoes to help with alignment on that center joint. Now if you don't have a domino, this step is definitely optional, but a biscuit joiner or using dowels would yield you the same exact end result as these dominoes. The dominoes are mainly just for alignment purposes and really don't give any internal strength to the tabletop. We'll put a few bar clamps across the top and bottom of the tabletop, and while that is left to dry, we can begin working on the bottom frame of this table. The bottom frame is surprisingly simple, which is made from building two identical trapezoid shapes from our stock lumber we milled earlier. There is only one angle needed to cut all of these pieces, and if you find yourself wishing you knew what that angle was, or the length, width, thickness, or overall dimensions of any of these pieces are, I have a set of plans which can be found at the link in the description, available at what I consider to be a very reasonable price, and the plans have both the material requirements for using hardwood such as this, or 2x6s and 4x4s that you could get from any Lowe's or Home Depot. Anyway, I'm using dominoes to put all these pieces together, however dowels or pocket holes is perfectly acceptable. But before we can assemble the frame of this table, we'll need to cut a half lap joint on both the bottom and the top stretchers, which will let those pieces interlock with each other as the frame comes together. Depending on your method of joinery, it might be beneficial to number or letter each of the individual corner joints, and after we have one trapezoid assembled, we can move on to building the other one actually inside of that first trapezoid. The way this frame is set up with the angles, it'll require us to get a little creative with the clamps, and it might help to save some of those excess offcut pieces from the frame earlier. However, I was just able to throw enough clamps on there to keep everything in place, and while that dried, we could get back to the tabletop and cut this thing in a circle. Using a router to cut a circular tabletop is much easier than it actually looks. All you really have to do is mount the router to a fixed position on the end of a board or piece of plywood, and then create a pivot point on the opposite end of that board or plywood, which lets you rotate the router around the circle, cutting a small groove in multiple shallow passes. I like to go about halfway down before cutting the rest of the excess off with a jigsaw, and finally moving on to a flush cut bit again with the router. Because of the amount of dust and chips coming off of this, I took the tabletop outside. Since I already had it outside, I trimmed the top edge, with a small roundover bit followed by a chamfer bit on the bottom to create a beveled profile. Finally, that entire base frame was also detailed with a 1/4 inch roundover bit, just to soften up all the edges and overall profile. So our top and base are both finished, and it would be an obvious statement if I said that we need a way to attach them. To respect any degree of wood movement, meaning expansion and contraction, I'll be using furniture bolts with elongated holes in the frame, which essentially will keep the tabletop pinned down to the frame, but will still allow for any lateral expansion and contraction across the grain of the tabletop. So I'll first center the frame on the underside of the tabletop, then make a small mark through the center of each of those elongated slots, followed by drilling down about halfway through the tabletop with a Forstner bit. This lets us put a threaded insert on the underside of the table, which those bolts will screw into after we have the frame put back in place. In my opinion, this is the best and most secure way to attach a frame to a tabletop. However, expansion brackets, Z-clips, or figure 8 fasteners would work just fine as well. At this point, the table went together very well, but there was one small problem, and that's that the table wobbled a little bit. Now, whether that's because of the table itself or my workbench being unlevel, it doesn't really matter. We need to take care of the wobble before this goes to someone's home. To get rid of that wobble, we'll recess these adjustable furniture levelers up under the underside of the frame. And if it just so happens that the floor it's going on is level and they're not needed, they can be hidden within the table. The final steps of this table build is to sand everything down, get it ready for stain. I sanded it down to, I believe, 180, and then I'm using a different finish which I've never tried before. The finish being Natura One Coat, specifically the white color. It is a 2-part stain similar to Rubio, and I think it turned out excellent. The white on the ash highlights the grain and also leaves that light natural color, which is exactly what I was going for. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these 2-part stains, you just saturate the wood with the color, let it set for a few minutes, and then you wipe and buff everything off. It is a little messy compared to other stains, but it is extremely easy to use and gives you a much more uniform finish than some of the other products. I let the stain cure for about a week before applying some N3 Nano Finish, and a few days after that N3 was finally cured, we could put those bottom furniture bolts back in. So that will wrap the build up, and here is the end result from that one giant board that we started with in the beginning. So for such a simple design, I think this table is very aesthetically pleasing, and I love the look of the ash. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching.